My name is Claire, and for 34 years, I believed my sister was my best friend. I was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong until the day my grandmother's lawyer called me into his office and slid a sealed envelope across the table. Grandma Ruth raised me and my sister Diane after our parents died in a car accident when I was 7 and Diane was 11. She wasn't just our grandmother. She was the only stability we ever had. She cooked us breakfast every morning before school. She sat through every recital, every graduation, every heartbreak. When I got married, she was the one who walked me down the aisle because there was no one else left to do it. Diane, on the other hand, drifted. She moved out at 19, called on holidays, showed up for Christmas dinner when it was convenient. I used to make excuses for her. She's busy. She's building her career. She loves Grandma in her own way. I told myself that for 15 years. When Grandma Ruth got sick 2 years ago, I was the one who moved back into her house. I quit my part-time job. I managed her medications, her doctor's appointments, her bad nights when the pain got so bad she couldn't sleep. Diane visited maybe 4 times in those 2 years. Each time, she brought flowers and left within an hour. Grandma passed away this past March. At the funeral, Diane cried harder than anyone. She hugged me and said, "We're all we have left now, Claire. Just us." I believed her, right up until the lawyer's office. The will was straightforward on paper. The house, the savings, Grandma's small stock portfolio. Everything split 50-50 between me and Diane. That's what the lawyer read aloud. That's what I expected, because that's what Grandma had told me herself, more than once, sitting at her kitchen table with her reading glasses on. But then the lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Feldman, cleared his throat and said there was an amendment, filed 6 weeks before Grandma died. It reduced my portion of the estate to 15%. Diane would get the rest. I felt the room tilt. I asked him to repeat it, because surely I'd misheard. He hadn't misspoken. The amendment was real, notarized, signed with what looked like Grandma's signature. I looked at Diane. She didn't look surprised. She looked down at her hands, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face that wasn't grief. It was relief. I drove home that night without remembering a single mile of the road. I kept replaying every conversation I'd had with Grandma in her final months. She never once mentioned changing the will. She never once seemed unhappy with me. If anything, in her last weeks, she held my hand every night and told me she didn't know what she would have done without me. Something didn't add up, and I couldn't let it go. I started asking questions quietly. I called the nursing agency that had sent a part-time aide to help me those last few months. I asked if anyone remembered a notary visiting the house. One of the aides, a woman named Priya who'd worked the evening shifts, went quiet on the phone for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. She told me that about 6 weeks before Grandma passed, Diane had shown up on one of my rare days off, the one Saturday a month I took to run errands. Diane brought a folder of papers and a man Priya didn't recognize. Grandma was heavily medicated that day, barely lucid, drifting in and out of sleep from the pain medication. Priya said she remembered feeling uneasy but didn't think it was her place to say anything at the time. My hands were shaking by the time I hung up the phone. I called Mr. Feldman the next morning and asked if the notary who witnessed the amendment was someone Grandma had used before. He checked his records. It wasn't the notary Grandma had used for every other document in her life. It was someone new, someone Diane apparently found. I asked for the notary's contact information. I asked for medical records from that exact day. Priya, to her credit, agreed to write a statement about what she'd witnessed. I found Grandma's regular doctor's notes from that week, which described her as, quote, disoriented and minimally responsive following a medication adjustment. 6 weeks before her death, on the one day I wasn't there, my grandmother had been in no condition to understand, let alone sign, a legal document that would strip away half of what she'd always intended for me to have. I hired a lawyer. Not out of anger, though the anger was there, simmering under everything. I did it because I owed it to Grandma to make sure her real wishes were honored, not the version Diane had engineered while she was too weak to say no. The case moved slowly. Diane hired her own attorney and denied everything, insisted Grandma had been perfectly clear-minded that day, insisted I was just bitter about being the one who got stuck doing the caretaking while she lived her own life. She said that to my face, at a mediation meeting, like the 2 years I spent managing Grandma's pain medications and holding her hair back during chemo were some kind of obligation I should have resented her for avoiding. But the evidence spoke for itself. Priya's statement. The doctor's notes. The new notary, who, when questioned under oath, admitted he'd never actually met Grandma before that day and had no way of independently verifying her mental state. Diane's own bank records showed a payment to that notary's office 2 days before the signing, a payment she couldn't explain. The judge ruled the amendment invalid due to lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence. The original will stood 50-50, exactly as Grandma had always intended. Diane didn't speak to me after the ruling. She hasn't since. Some people might call that a loss. I call it clarity. I think about Grandma Ruth almost every day. Not the version of her that was manipulated in her final weeks, but the version who raised us with everything she had left after burying her own son. The version who believed, right up until she couldn't fight for herself anymore, that fairness mattered. I didn't fight for the money. I fought because somewhere in that hospital bed, a woman who gave me everything deserved to have her real voice honored, even after she no longer had the strength to raise it herself. I used my share to set up a small scholarship in her name at the community college where she once took night classes to become a teacher's aide, back when she was raising 2 grieving little girls alone. It felt like the only ending that made sense. Family isn't supposed to work like this. But sometimes the people who show up the least are the ones who take the most, and the only way to stop them is to refuse to look away.